In 2013, there was the HTC One. In 2014, today, there's also the HTC One. But just as the Apple does with its iPad lineup, the term One is used for HTC's premium smartphone. The new one is also known as the M8, so just to make sure we're not going to be confusing everybody in this video, that's what we're going to call it to differentiate this phone from last year's phone, which was the M7. M7 was a massive improvement over the previous year's flagship phone, which was the One X. But the M8 feels like more of an iterative update, with a newer design, fresh firmware, and a few clever new features that we haven't seen before. It's also among the most powerful smartphones on the market right now, thanks to the 2.3 GHz quad-core Snapdragon 801 processor that's running the show. Whereas the M7 had a 4.7-inch 1080p display, the M8 has a 5-inch display with the same resolution. That means the pixel density is a little lower, but we doubt that most people will even notice the difference. In fact, the new phone also uses a new font that takes advantage of the extra space, and it looks pretty good. Both HTC Ones have the same arc on the back and are both primarily made of metal, but the latest one is even more so. The extra metal wraps around the chassis of the phone and gives you a feeling that your phone will indeed be protected from external forces. However, that's as long as it doesn't slip out of your hands because of how incredibly slippery it is. The brushed metal finish that comes on the M8 makes it feel just as smooth as a pebble. Don't get us wrong, it actually looks quite beautiful, but I felt like I was hanging on to a wet fish. There's also a new camera we've never seen before, and we're happy to see a set of 2 LED flashes for natural looking pictures in low light conditions. There's a higher res 5 megapixel camera on the front, which is great for all those who like selfies. Boomsound was also introduced on the M7, and it was one of the loudest speakers we've ever heard on a smartphone. Thankfully, the M8 is even louder. You can also use a micro SD card up to 128 gigs, which was something that you couldn't get on the M7. If you don't need all that, then you have the option of 16 or 32 gigs of internal storage. And heck, HTC also hooks you up with 50 gigs of Google Drive storage for 2 years. Now onto the dual camera. The bottom camera is the same 4 megapixel ultra pixel sensor that HTC used on the M7. So you're not going to see a difference in standard image quality. However, the big difference that you're going to see is in the top lens, which technically isn't even a camera. Instead, it's a depth sensor that can calculate the relative distance between the phone and the subjects you're shooting. It's able to tell which objects should be in the foreground and which ones should be in the background, and unless you take advantage of a whole bunch of cool effects after you've taken the picture. For instance, you can now change the depth of field or add bokeh with U-focus. There's also foregrounder, which lets you bring one subject into the foreground and convert the rest of the picture into a few different effects of your choosing. You can cartoonize the rest of the picture. You can throw in some motion blur, or our favorite, you can turn it into the Take On Me music video. There's copy and paste, new filters, the ability to alter faces, and there's actually a heck of a lot more that we won't mention in this video. But we will mention it in our full-length review. The duo camera can also speed up the autofocus to 300 milliseconds. Although, honestly, in practice, we just did not see enough of a difference between the M8 and the M7 here. There's also manual settings, which are set up much like the Nokia Lumia camera, in that you can change your settings in real time using sliders. You can even save those settings as a preset for later. The M8 runs on the latest version of Android known as KitKat, but the user interface it uses is called Sense 6, or as HTC likes to call it, the Sixth Sense. Marketing team, don't quit your day job. Most of it has been improved or facelifted over Sense 5 in some way, but the UI is nearly identical, so you can still find almost everything you need if you were already used to the M7. Blink Feed, which came on the M7, is now more customized, as you're able to put together feeds based on your personalized searches. So, for instance, if I'm looking for articles on cheese, I can have my very own cheese feed. Best thing ever. One other clever touch is Motion Launch. Now this lets you wake up your phone using swipe gestures and double taps as soon as you pick your phone up. You can activate certain features or screens depending on which direction you swipe. It's a great start, but we'd love to have the ability to customize each gesture and have it go to wherever we want it to go. Battery life is much better on the M8, as I've never had a problem making it through a whole day. It's a 2600 milliamp hour battery, which is larger than the 2300 milliamp hour battery on the M7. On most days with normal use, I have about 30% battery left. It also performs so well that we've never had to think about how it's performing. The Snapdragon 801 is the best you can get on the market today, which means it'll still be relevant for a long time to come. And Since HTC is committing to keeping the M8 freshly updated for 2 years, you hopefully will never have to worry about running outdated firmware. Overall, the HTC One M8 does a fantastic job on most facets. Our only concern is that the M7 surprised us all and blew our minds. And we just don't feel the same way this time around. It performs well, it looks great, and the dual camera is actually a lot of fun to use, not to mention useful. But HTC also needs to make sure that it's doing everything it can to stick its neck out of the crowd. So that way potential buyers will give it some consideration over the Galaxy S5. Overall, we give the M8 high marks and think it's definitely worth trying out.
Every photo taken with this pair of cameras will actually store the depth data that lets you play with different effects, like putting leaves or flower petals.